Hey guys, my guest today, Captain Paul Watson, is going to be discussing ocean conservation and how we can help. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Hey guys, how's it going? I hope you're having a great day. I know I am. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. We're 45 strong up and down the state of California. So that means if you have a paranormal need, we can get you. It might take us a couple days because California is a big state. You know, a lot of people think of California kind of like Hawaii, you know, that we have beaches and surfing and all that stuff. We do. The central to Southern California has all that stuff. But then there's the northern part that's kind of cooler. People are still surfing, but it's cold. But we also have farmland. We've got high desert. You know, we've got mountains. So it's really spread out, That's why when I say there's 45 people up and down, yes, we have that, but you might be in an area that's further out from where they're located. So it might take us a couple of days to get you, but I do have mediums on staff that can call you and take a look at what's going on. And in most cases, they can calm the energy down, you know, if there is something there, until we can get out there. But it doesn't take us more than 1 or 2 days. Right. Anyway, if you're watching from Facebook today, please feel free, if you haven't done so already, if you like what you see in here, to follow. You know, we're always looking for followers. And also, if you like the show, thumbs up, happy faces, that kind of thing, and comment, because that puts us up higher in the algorithm, which means when the Facebook computer looks at it, or the brains at Facebook look at it, it'll put us further out there for more people to see, right? And it works the same way with TikTok. It works the same way with YouTube. So, you know, over YouTube, we're looking for subscribers. We're 310 away from hitting that 1,000 mark over there. We're building. The momentum's building. You guys are doing a great job. It'd be great if you could leave me happy faces and stuff over there in comments, because, you know, during the show, because what happens again is it's all about the algorithm. TikTok works the same way. So for you guys that are coming over from TikTok to watch, please leave comments or whatever, you know, you do. Okay, that being said, I have 761 videos over at YouTube, and they're all this show. And what I've done, because when you go in to look at to find something to watch, they're all over the place. I get migraines from it. So what I did was I've taken them and I put them into separate folders. So if you're into conservation, which is what we're talking about today, there's a folder for that. So you know it's ready to go in there and take a look. If you're into Nancy Matthews on Fridays, there's a folder for her. UFOs and abductions, etc., etc. So it makes it a lot easier to find, you know, what you're looking for. Okay, that being said, my guest today is Captain Paul Watson, and we're going to be talking about ocean conservation. We're going to be talking about disappearing species. You know, it's kind of like a domino effect, because, you know, the kelp disappears, then there's no food for the particular species, or something is overfished. Remember, big fish eat smaller fish, how that works? So if something gets overfished, then that destroys the food for whatever would have eaten that in the first place. So it's like a double-edged sword, and I think a lot of it has to do with cooperation too. I mean, it's fine and dandy that the U.S., the U.S. is maybe trying to do things about Mr. Watts, Captain Watson probably has more details on that. I don't, but you also have to figure in try to get cooperation from other countries, because while we may not be doing whaling or anything like that, you know, somebody else is trapping and doing whaling, or taking the kelp beds out or whatever. It's just how it is. It works that way with oxygen, right? You know, we're looking at that CO2 levels and all that, the pollution, the carbon levels and all that. And, you know, it's fine and dandy that the U.S. is doing this stuff, but, you know, some other country may not be doing it. So I think we'll talk, like I said, we'll talk to Captain Watson about that, where it has to be a worldwide cooperation to keep these things going. I grew up by the ocean. I grew up my sister lived in Fort Bragg, so every time I had time off of school or weekends, I was in Fort Bragg. So, you know, and I admit I used to go fishing, but we'd only get like 2 fish and not overdo it. But I mean, I got really close to this stuff, you know, the hermit crabs in the tide pools and things like that. I have a deep respect for the ocean. You know, I've been out on the rocks where whales have actually, you know, blown out on these rocks. It scares the heck out of you because it's so quiet. You're fishing, and then all of a sudden, boom, you hear the whale. So anyway, I'm going to bring Paul on, and we're going to start talking about this stuff. And I think this is an important show to do. It really is an important show. Here we go. Good afternoon, sir.
Oh, good afternoon.
Can you tell me about you?
Where would you like me to begin?
Well, I mean, obviously, because I read back on your background. So you've done time on the ocean, on a boat. What got you into this part of the conservation?
Well, actually, I began when I was 10 years old. I spent a summer swimming with a family of beavers in eastern Canada where I was raised. And every day I was swimming with the beavers, and I had a wonderful time. And the next year when I went back, I couldn't find them. And I found out that trappers had taken them all out. So that made me quite angry. So I returned in the winter, and I walked the trap lines and freed the animals and destroyed the traps. And I guess I've been doing the same thing ever since.
It's wonderful, though. But I mean, like I said earlier, it's sad because things are being hunted to extinction, and that makes it bad. Go ahead.
We've driven more species to extinct in the last few hundred years, and it's incredible. We're going to lose more species of plants and animals between 2000 and 2065 than we lost in the last 65 million years. They even have a name for it called the Anthropocene, or the sixth major extinction. And for the most part, it's out of sight and out of mind, and people don't really pay any mind to it.
Sure. Well, that's the thing. They don't pay any mind to it until they can't get food on their table. And they're wondering why,
Well, yeah, because all over the world, commercial fisheries are in a state of collapse. The northern cod fishery collapsed, orange roughy fishery collapsed, and bluefin tuna fisheries collapsed. And doesn't seem to be any end in sight, because the problem is when things become scarce, they become more valuable. So scarcity translates into more profits, which motivates them to go out and get it. So the fewer the fish, the greater the technology which is put in play to catch those fish. So now you're seeing $100 and $150 million factory ships, 100-mile long lines, 100-mile long gill nets, giant purse seine nets, and they're literally stripping the ocean of life.
Well, I agree with that. I've been doing a study on that as well. When you look at even the crab population now, I mean, like, I hate to say it, deadliest catch, God forbid. But I mean, those guys are having a hard time right now finding a crab because they're just not there.
Well, I'm surprised it's lasted as long as it has. I mean, it's just totally over exploitation. But I'll tell you the one thing that's the most alarming is that since 1950, there's been a 40% diminishment in phytoplankton in the sea. And phytoplankton provides up to 70% of the oxygen in the air we breathe and sequesters enormous amounts of CO2. Phytoplankton is the basis of all life on the planet. If phytoplankton disappears, the ocean dies, and if the ocean dies, we die with it. So it's extremely important. And why is this happening? Because phytoplankton, these aquatic plants, depend on nutrients to survive and to flourish. The nutrients, primary nutrients, are iron, magnesium, and nitrogen, and that comes from animals like whales and dolphins and seabirds. One blue whale every day defecates about 3 tons of manure, and heavily rich in those 3 elements. And when you diminish those species, you're going to diminish the phytoplankton populations. Whales are literally the farmers of the ocean, and what they do is fertilize crops of phytoplankton.
Now, when you think of like whaling, I mean, you always think of the Russian, I hate to say it, the Russians, or even the Scandinavians or whatever doing it. Which country does the most whaling now?
Well, we've managed to shut whaling down pretty much 90% over the last 50 years. So the only countries that are whaling now and confined to their territorial waters are Norway, Japan, Iceland, and Denmark. And Japan might return to the Southern Ocean next year or the year after, because they're building a $150 million factory ship. If they do, then we'll go down there to confront them once again. Right now, we're battling Iceland because they're targeting endangered fin whales. All whaling is illegal internationally. The International Whaling Commission banned commercial whaling in 1986, and that law is still in effect. So all whalers are criminals right now. But the problem is that there's no real enforcement agency that can enforce the laws. And that's the problem on the high seas with everything from whales to fish or whatever. We have all the laws and the regulations and the treaties we need, but we don't have any enforcement because there's a lack of economic and political motivation to go out and enforce these laws.
When you talk about these high-end boats, when people think about whaling, I'm not laughing about it. When people think about whaling, they think of a harpoon, so somebody on the front of a boat, either holding a harpoon like, Moby Dick, or those big harpoon guns. How does whaling work on these high-tech boats?
Well, they have harpoon ships, which are big cannons that are on the bow that fire 150-pound explosive harpoons into the whales, and it can take 2 to 3 harpoons to kill one whale.
Wow.
It can take anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour to kill a whale. So with the Japanese fleet, you have 4 harpoon vessels and 1 giant factory ship. That's the Japanese whaling fleet. Iceland has 2 harpoon vessels. They used to have 4, but I sank 2 of them. So they only have 2 left. Norway has a lot of small boats that go after minke whales. In Japan, they kill whales in their territorial waters with harpoon vessels also. But what we've managed to do since 1975 is we shut down whaling in Australia, Chile, Spain, the pirate whaling operations, and Peru, South Korea. So there's been a lot of victories over the last 50 years, and I think we've eradicated about 90% of the global whaling operations, and we're just mopping up the rest.
So how bad is how close are they to extinction, these whales?
Well, the good news on whales is that populations are coming back. Humpback whale populations are recovering. Right whales are being threatened by ship traffic mainly, and also by the construction of offshore windmills, because it's not the windmills themselves, but the construction of the windmills creates about 200 decibel sounds, which basically bursts the eardrums of dolphins and whales. So, not much is being said about that. We try to address it, but nobody wants to hear it because they want alternative energy, and they don't want to hear that it actually has problems. So, but whale populations, I think, are for the most part recovering, but they're going to recover slow.
Well, like I said earlier, it's a domino effect, because if the plankton goes away, the whales have no food.
And that's one of the big problems right now is the diminishment of food supplies for whales and dolphins, orcas. In the Pacific Northwest, the orcas are literally starving because they're overfished everything that they eat. And as we diminish fish populations around the world, what we're seeing right now off of Gibraltar and the entrance to the Mediterranean, our orcas are actually attacking sailing boats because we've literally retaken the fish out of their mouths.
What do you think has to be done? I mean, you guys are doing good, like with these factories and everything that are doing this. But what about the general population? How can you possibly get the word out to everybody? Because, like you say, people kind of ignore it because the food's on the table. There it is. They don't stop to think about what it could be costing to have this.
Well, we try to do what we can. We had the Whale Wars show on Animal Planet, which reached a lot of people. And really, we have to work within the media to understand the media. And to get your message across to the media is difficult, but it's not difficult if you know how to do it. And because, the media, the mainstream media, only understands 4 things: sex, scandal, violence, and celebrity. So that's why you have to incorporate those elements. When I brought Bridget Bardot off to the ice floes in Newfoundland in '77, that guaranteed us the cover of every single major magazine in the world. So, by using celebrities, by using drama, you can get your point across. In 2006, I went to the networks and I said, look, the biggest show on Discovery right now is a bunch of men going into a very remote and hostile cold place to catch crabs. And I can give you men and women from around the world going to a far more remote, far colder area to save whales. It has to be more compelling than catching crabs every day.
And the other question I have, is you see a lot of things about Greenpeace, strapping themselves in front of these ships. How do you guys go about doing this stuff?
Well, we intervene. We go after illegal activities, and blocking ships, ramming ships. I've sunk 6 whaling ships, and that might seem highly illegal, but for instance, in 1986, I sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet, destroyed their whale processing plant, and because they were in violation of international conservation law. They didn't take any action against me. I had to actually fly to Reykjavik and demand that they charge me. And when I landed there, I was met by the police and immigration officer, and they said, how long do you intend to stay in Iceland? I said, I don't know, 5 days, 5 minutes, 5 years, you tell me. And they said, well, we have to go for interrogation. I said, great, I'm all for it. Let's go to interrogation. They said, are you admitting to sinking these ships? I said, we sunk them, and we're going to sink the other 2 at the first opportunity. The next morning, they put me in a plane and sent me back to the States. And the Minister of Justice stood up in the House, in the Parliament there, the All thing it's called, and he said, who does he think he is? He comes into our country and demands to be arrested. Get him out of here. And the reason he said that was because if they knew to put me on trial would be to put themselves on trial for their illegal activities. So that's how we challenge our opposition. The reason they get away with doing what they're doing is because there's no enforcement. And that's the reason we get away with doing what we're doing against them. Because really, the ocean is the Wild West. Right,
right. So for people that don't understand how this food chain works with the ocean, can you explain a little bit? Because I know that the whales eat plankton, but the killer whales also will eat meat, like sharks or whatever. So how does it work?
Well, the phytoplankton is the basis of all life, not just in the ocean, but on the planet, because it provides 70% of the air, of the oxygen in the air we breathe, and sequesters enormous amounts of CO2. But the phytoplankton then feeds the zooplankton, and the zooplankton then feeds the fishes and the whales and the penguins, moving all up the food chain to the orcas or to the sperm whales, to humans. And so basically the foundation is phytoplankton, and on top of that is zooplankton, and everything else is dependent upon that.
Okay. The other thing I was thinking too is people, I think the most thing they're aware of as far as this goes is the whales, but there's also other fish like you were talking about, tuna populations and stuff that are being affected as well.
Yes, and we've had campaigns to rescue tuna. I cut the nets off the coast of Libya of an outlaw fishing operation and released 800 tuna back into the ocean, and we've interfered with drift net fishing, gill net fishing. We pulled one gill net out of the Southern Ocean that was targeting toothfish. Toothfish is sold under the name of Chilean sea bass. It's not from Chile. It's not a bass, but it's a marketing term. So that one net was set 2 kilometers down. It took us 110 hours to pull it up. That net was 70 tons and was 72 kilometers long. That was one net from one ship. And so every day, like literally thousands and thousands of miles of gill nets or long lines are being set. And a lot of that ends up being discarded. So about 40% of all of the plastics in the ocean come from discarded fishing gear, which become ghost nets and become very, very destructive. So the fishing industry is causing problems on many levels, not just with overfishing, but also with plastic pollution.
Yeah, what comes to mind is these videos you see of people rescuing turtles and that have swam into these nets, and then they're all caught up, and the guys pull them on the boat, and they're cutting these things off of them.
And also we're also killing about 90 million sharks every year. I mean, you got to say, who's the monster? The average number of people killed by sharks every year is 5. And we killed 90 million of them.
Wow.
But we've demonized the sharks, so we justify the killing of them. It's actually safer. It's actually safer to swim in the ocean than it's actually safer to swim in the ocean than it is to play golf. More people die on golf courses from lightning strikes and bee stings than are killed in the ocean. Every day, 200 million people on this planet go into the ocean, and yet there's only 5 people every year killed by sharks. Horses kill more people, dogs kill more people, hippopotamuses kill more people. So we unfairly demonize sharks. And the shark is the apex predator in the ocean. It's absolutely essential. The shark has molded the behavior, the camouflage, the speed of every fish in the sea. The sharks have been there for 450 million years, and they're basically keeping the ocean healthy. And the problem is, for instance, where are shark attacks most frequent? There are 3 places in the world where shark attacks are most frequent, and they all have one thing in common. And those 3 places are La Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean, Western Australia, and Queensland, Australia. And the thing they have in common is shark control programs. They kill sharks. And what this does, for instance, La Reunion Island, you kill all the sharks inside the reef area. That creates a vacuum, which brings in sharks from outside. Now, these sharks coming in from the outside, they're very territorial. They're more aggressive because of that, because they're trying to establish their territory. So the shark kill programs are actually encouraging hostile sharks to come into that vacuum. And we're really causing the problem with shark attacks when it's not the sharks. I've swum with great whites. I've swum with tiger sharks. I've never felt threatened by them.
Yeah, I've swum with Caribbean reef sharks too. I've never had an issue with it. I think it's sad. I think it's a sad state of affairs. You know, when you're hunting species to extinction, it's not right. But how? I mean, like you say, you go out there, you block the boats, you do this, you do that. But how hard is it to get this stuff regulated?
Well, it's not hard to get it regulated at all. We have all the regulations, we have all the laws. The problem is it's almost impossible to enforce. So that's what we do, is we go out and enforce. And I use the United Nations World Charter for Nature as our foundation to do that. The UN World Charter for Nature says that any individual or non-government organization or nation state is empowered to uphold international conservation law. And that's what we're doing. About 12 years ago, I was invited by the FBI to give a lecture in Quantico on eco-activism. And one of the FBI agents said, well, you're operating on a very fine line. And I said, well, does it really matter how fine it is as long as you don't actually cross the line? We don't cross that line. I've never been convicted of a felony. I've never caused a single injury to a single person in 50 years.
Well, like you say, there is some hope out there. You see things changing. But I mean, how much change does there have to really be out there so that the plankton starts, maturing again and growing in all this?
Well, at the United Nations Conference on Climate Change in 2015 in Paris, which is called COP21, I spoke there and I said, look, all we have to do to address climate change is simple. We don't have to do anything. We just have to leave the ocean alone. Give it time to recover from the damage that we've done to it. We need at least a 75-year moratorium on heavy gear industrialized fishing operations. Give the ocean time to recover, because all commercial fisheries are in a state of collapse. There is no sustainable fishing anywhere in the world, anywhere. And it's going to get worse. So we should put a moratorium on it if it's going to survive. The ocean is resilient. It can recover. We've seen that in World War I and World War II, when we were too busy killing each other and the fish were left free to do whatever they want. And their populations rebounded. It doesn't take much time for it to heal itself. And we just have to give it that time.
I think a good example of that was the lockdowns during COVID. Because
yes,
there was a lot of
rivers.
Yeah, there was a lot of rivers and stuff that suddenly cleared up because nobody was out.
It doesn't take very long at all for nature to recover.
I really am in awe of you for the work that you do. I really am for doing this.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And if I was younger myself, I might get involved. Now I'm too old to be running around doing stuff like that. But I mean, how frightening! How frightening is it if you're in this little boat and you come across one of those big freighter things?
I don't know about being younger. I'm 72. I'm still doing it. But I've been around boats all my life, so that's not really a thing that I'm very concerned about. I was trained in the Canadian Coast Guard and the Norwegian Swedish Merchant Marine prior to getting involved. I was a co-founder of Greenpeace in 1972. And founded Sea Shepherd Conservation Society in 1977 and the Captain Paul Watson Foundation in 2022. So I've been doing this, well over 60 years.
When you talk about the disappearing plankton and stuff, as far as the sea creatures themselves go, which species do you think is in the most danger at this point?
Well, I think everything in the ocean is endangered because I would say the most important thing, as I mentioned before, is phytoplankton. Phytoplankton collapses, everything collapses. If you look at it this way, if you look at the Earth as a spaceship, which is what it is, we're on this incredible voyage around the Milky Way galaxy, and every spaceship has a life support system. And that life support system provides us with everything we need: food, the air we breathe, and regulates climate and temperature. And that life support system is operated and maintained by a crew of engineers. They keep everything running. We humans, we're not engineers. We're passengers having a wonderful time amusing ourselves. But what we are doing is we're murdering the crew. We're killing off the engineers. And there's only so many engineers you kill before machinery begins to fall apart. We don't live in a world without bees and trees and worms and insects and bacterium and phytoplankton. We simply don't. We're interdependent. There are three basic laws of ecology. The first is the law of diversity. The strength of an ecosystem is dependent upon the diversity of species within it. The second is the law of interdependence, that all of those species need each other. They're interdependent with each other. And the third is the law of finite resources. There's a limit to carrying capacity. There's a limit to resources. When one species steals the carrying capacity of other species, that leads to diminishment of both diversity and interdependence, which leads to ecological collapse. You know, a few years ago, I had Brett Hume as a reporter for the Fox network, and he called me up and he said, I heard that at a lecture you said that worms and bees, trees and whales are more important than people. And I said, I think I did say that. And he says, how could you say something so outrageous? Well, I said it because worms, trees, bees, and whales are more important than people. That's a fact. And the proof of that is that they can live here without us, but we cannot live here without them. We need them. They don't need us. That makes them ecologically far more important than we are.
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. And how do you see this play out? Like you say, 70 years, 100 years for the changes to occur? Or like you say, will they go quickly? Because I mean, like I said, during COVID, wow, you know, when you looked at the different little streams and stuff and how well they cleared up, I mean, that was real fast.
Well, at some point things will collapse, and that will probably allow nature to regenerate and everything, but it won't be very good for people. The problem with climate change right now is it's no longer should be called climate change. I'm calling it climate chaos because it's out of control. It's completely out of control. There's nothing we can do right now to stop what's happening. All we can do is adjust to it. We need to adjust to survive it. We have to adjust. I mean, we're seeing things now that we haven't I've never seen in my lifetime. Superstorms, outrageous fires breaking out everywhere, droughts and floods and everything. You know, where I lived in Vermont, I thought that was one of the safest places to live. You know, I've been living there for years and on a mountain, fortunately, but I never saw anything like a bad storm, never saw any floods really. And just recently we had this outrageous flood, and mudslides and everything. Where did that come from? Things are changing, and they're not. And we saw the Lahaina fires, for example. I thought one of the most ironic things that happened in the last month was that about a dozen people put up a barricade to block Burning Man, and the barricade was to address climate change, saying, you know, we got to do something about it. I thought it was probably the most Burning Man thing that anybody could do, and everybody got really angry. They got mad. They didn't want to hear this. And then 2 days later, they were all victims of climate change. You know, so it's people just don't want to hear the message, and the problem is they think it's just all going to go away, but it's not. It's not going to go away. All we can do is adjust to it and try. But I've always said that, you know, when you're faced with an impossible problem, you need to find the impossible solution. And I believe impossible solutions can be found through the application of passion, courage, imagination, and perseverance. A good example, 1972, the very idea that Nelson Mandela would be president of South Africa was unthinkable. It was impossible, and yet the impossible became possible. And all over the world, I'm seeing people, especially a lot of young people, who are making a difference by applying themselves to a particular species or whatever. Because of Diane Fossey, we still have mountain gorillas in Rwanda. Because of David Wingate, we still have the Bermuda storm petrel. Look what Greta Thunberg has been able to accomplish as a 16-year-old schoolgirl. People can make a difference, and they can make a difference by having the courage to actually go out and make that difference and not be deterred by critics, for example. Just be true to your passion. That's what I try to tell young people as much as possible. You know, when people say you ask young people to risk their lives to protect whales, how can you ask people to do that? I said, why is that so unusual? We ask young people to not only risk their lives but kill people to protect real estate and oil wells and religion and flags. I think it's a far more noble thing to risk your life to protect an endangered species or a threatened habitat.
Absolutely. And you know, over the years, and you know, as we age, because like my dad says, at some point it's not our world anymore. But you wonder what the next generation is going to be like. You know, you wonder, you know, you're leaving their stuff in their hands. But what I've seen, like what you've seen and what you were just talking about, is the next generation is pretty cool. I mean, they're looking at all this stuff and they're willing to go out and deal with it.
Well, we're looking at probably the first generation in a long time that doesn't really know what their future is, what the world's going to be like in 50, 40 years. My generation actually lived through the most materialistically wealthy and freest generation ever, through the 60s and the 70s, the 80s. That won't come again. Governments are becoming more repressive because as climate change and environmental issues deteriorate, governments are going to become more oppressive. They're going to go after protesters. They're going to go after people who are trying to question corporate profits and that. And so, you know, they're even arresting in Europe now. They're even arresting people before they step out of the door to go to a protest. A protest has been announced and they're getting ready to leave. The police go right into the house and say, you're under arrest until the protest is over. You know, this is unheard of. I mean, I could not do today the things that I did in the 60s and 70s. I'd be shot if I did that. Right. So things have become more repressive and things have become more dire. But again, people have imagination. People have willpower, and they have courage. And I think that overall, that's where people can actually make a difference. The future will be defined by what people do today. I don't get depressed about the future. I don't get pessimistic about the future because I have no power over the future. Right. All the power we have is right now in the present, and the future will be defined what we do each and every day today. That's where our power lies.
And along that line, now, you know, for helping to get the conservation to help these things along, what do people have to really do? You know, especially landlocked people. I mean, there's a lot of those, you know, plastic bottles that they're trying to outlaw now and all that because all they do is fill up the, you know, the dumps and all that. So what's a place that someone can start even in their home?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that, you know, people aren't landlocked. There's a different view of what the ocean is. We tend to think of the ocean as the sea, but actually the ocean is the planet. It's water in continuous circulation through many mediums. Sometimes it's in the sea, sometimes in ice, sometimes underground, sometimes in the atmosphere, sometimes in the cells of every plant and animal on the planet. The water in your body right now is recently in some other animal or plant's body. It was recently locked in ice. It was recently flowing underground. So we are the ocean. The ocean flows through us every single day. So everything is connected to everything else. So when you pollute the atmosphere, you pollute the ocean. When you pollute the sea, when you pollute the sea, you pollute our bodies. So you pollute our bodies, you pollute the land and the sea. Everything is interconnected, interdependent.
Okay, cool. Now, I was just thinking, as you said that too. I mean, there's the moon. The moon is in the sun. It's all connected. You know, with
everything is
all
connected.
That stuff. Yeah, it's all connected. It's all connected to that. So, if, like I said, ask for people to start doing the conservation at home to help out a little bit. What do you think would be basic steps for them to take?
Well, I think the most important thing is we've got to put an end to factory farming. You know, killing 90 billion animals every year is the single greatest source of groundwater pollution, the single greatest source of greenhouse gases, the single greatest source of dead zones in the ocean. And also it's a source of outbreaks of zoonotic transmission of viruses. You know, every year we kill vast numbers, millions and millions of animals on factory farms to control those viruses, because these concentration camps, which are factory farms, are what are producing a lot of these zoonotic transmitted viruses. And one of the reasons viruses are happening more and more is when you destroy environment or ecosystems and you destroy other species, the viruses that are associated with those species need somewhere to go. And 8 billion of us were an attractive host, and the virus doesn't have a mind, but it doesn't want to kill you. But to reach that coexistence, a lot of the hosts die in the process. But just look since 1995, we've seen the emergence of Ebola, Zika, West Nile, so many different zoonotic transmission of viruses, COVID being another one. And that's going to become worse and worse. The breakdown of ecosystems is going to lead to more new zoonotic transmissions. And it's not just in people. One of the things, factory farms of salmon farms on the west coast of Canada are creating viruses and spread to indigenous salmon populations that don't have any immunity. And they're killing off indigenous salmon populations because of that. Because these salmon farms are heavily dosed with antibiotics and chemicals, and the indigenous salmon don't have any immunity to any of that.
It makes a lot of sense. Do you think, or do you see changes, you know, because they've been so worried about the ozone layer, you know, with global warming and all that. Have you seen, in the last few years, have you seen any improvements in it, or is it just kind of staying the same?
Well, the ozone layer is actually a good example of how actions can make a difference. That was a real problem back in the 70s, early 80s. Then they banned, with the Montreal Convention, they banned these aerosols. And actually, has improved the situation dramatically. So the ozone deterioration is not the threat that it once was. So it actually demonstrates that if we apply ourselves, we can actually change these things. We can reverse them. And that's why I'm proposing a moratorium on commercially industrialized fishing in order to protect our oceans.
And my question about global warming is this: to understand, because I know a lot of people think global warming, right? But they don't really understand what it is or what causes it. Can you clarify that?
Well, the buildup of greenhouse gases is probably the single greatest factor in doing that. And it's not just CO2; it's also it's even water vapor. It's also methane. It's so many different things that are contributing to that. And but it gets out of control. And we were warned a long time ago this happened. 250 million years ago was the Great Permian extinction, and the reason for this extinction was the buildup of CO2 up to about 1,600 parts per million, but it began was triggered at 400 parts per million, which is where we're at right now, and so we have to reduce that. You cannot have 500, 600 parts per million and survive. It has to be tapped. It has to be kept down. It's already too high. We can't go any much higher because then it gets out of control, and then you have the planet Venus, really, and what happened there, and so that's greenhouse gases out of control. It's chemically, it's very delicate. I mean, the Earth has mechanisms that have keep these things in control. Gases are controlled by biology and everything is intricately linked, interconnected, and it's when we mess around with this that things begin to collapse.
How hard is it to present this stuff to, say, politicians? I mean, are they willing to listen, or is it, thank you very much, that was interesting, bye? How's that work?
Politics is the art of the possible, which means you're not going to do anything that's going to get you, not reelected. And any politician who has the courage to actually take action is usually thrown out or get corporate donations dry up or whatever. Governments also have a lot of scientists. I don't trust any scientist that works for a government. I actually have a new name for them. I call them biostitutes. Basically they say whatever the governments want or the corporations want. I don't really think that anything can be accomplished through government at all. I never seen it. I haven't seen it. Change comes through the passion of individuals, and true scientists are, of course. One of the things I actually established a church called the Church of Biocentrism. It's not a religious thing in a way, but it's more of a science-based thing. But it's to encourage people to have a biocentric outlook or a perspective. Our big problem is anthropocentrism, this idea that everything is created for us, that we're dominant over everything. It's all about us. We're the only species that matter. Every single dominant religion on this planet is anthropocentric. We created our own gods in our image and everything. Biocentrism tends to be the philosophy of indigenous peoples worldwide, and it's this understanding that we're part of everything, we're intimately connected to everything, we have to live in harmony with all other species.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What do you say to someone that wants to get into your line of work?
When people say wanting to become an environmentalist, I always jokingly say you should study acting or music because you seem to have more influence as an actor or a musician than you do as a scientist. But I think that people really just need to follow what they're passionate about. If it's oceanography or marine biology or forestry or whatever, what are you really passionate about, and can I make a difference in that field? So, the strength of a movement, the strength of an ecosystem is in diversity. The strength of a movement is in diversity. So whether that approach is education, litigation, or legislation, or direct intervention, it's all working towards the same thing. It's the application of people's abilities and passions towards a particular goal.
And let's say when you go on a boat and you decide you're going to go after a whaling boat or something, is there a big decision process on that? Are you tracking these boats, or what makes you decide to go? I'm not going to say go after, but try to help a particular species.
Well, we look at the situation. The situation is, where can we practically intervene? Is there a strategic way that we can intervene? For instance, we know how to deal with Icelandic whalers. We know how to deal with the Japanese in the Southern Ocean. We simply go down, find them, and block their operations. We know how to deal with the illegal fishing. We simply go and cut their nets. So but not everything. For instance, windmills on the East Coast, which are causing the deaths of whales and dolphins. People, what are you going to do about it? The problem is, what can we do about it? I mean, we can talk to the media, we can talk to the legislature, whatever, but there's no way we can take a ship and actually do anything. We're not. It'd be like aquatic Don Quixotes going out and ramming windmills. It's not going to solve anything on that.
Right.
But so there you have to have education and science as a means to address that situation. What we do is we address illegal activities through intervention, blocking, and just literally stopping them.
Now you're in France right now. Are you
Yes.
doing a particular lecture or teaching, or what are you doing in France?
Well,
Yeah,
I came to France for my son's education. I wanted him to have a bilingual education, and also we work a lot out of Europe. My ship is in the UK right now. We're working on getting another one here in France, and my organization is now active in France, Spain, Italy, Germany, the UK, Brazil, New Zealand, Australia, and the United States, and Canada. And so, I could be anywhere, but I actually happen to like Paris quite a bit, so that's why I'm here.
Absolutely, I love Paris. In the future, when you look forward to the future of doing this, what do you want to see happen?
Well, I would like to see, an enforcement agency, an international enforcement agency that will uphold international conservation laws, regulations, and treaties. That's what we need. We have all these so-called marine sanctuaries or, places or reserves, but that's
Right.
where the poachers go, because they know that's where they can get things, but there's no enforcement. What's the point of having a sanctuary if there's no enforcement within the sanctuary?
Right.
Now, I have
Right.
to say, when it comes to the United States, national marine fisheries, the fish and wildlife and everything have been really good. So there's not a lot of illegal activities in U.S. waters and that. But the rest of the world, there's some. Scotland's pretty good. Australia's pretty good. But there's a lot of places. Most of the world, it's not very good at all.
As you get more and more into it, you've been doing this for years and years. What do you think what country do you think is the worst offender right now?
Well, it all depends, really. When it comes to illegal fishing, I would think it would be China, Russia, and Spain. When it comes to pollution, it would be the United States, Russia, China, Australia. They're pretty bad. Canada's pretty bad too. With the tar sands and that. The industrialized countries in general are a big source of the problem.
When you look at this stuff, and like I said, like we talked about the politicians earlier, is it easier to convince the general population, to conserve, or do you think it has to come from political level?
Oh, I think the general population is far ahead of the politicians, and that politicians just can't do anything. For instance, many years ago, I would say about 30 years ago, actually, I remember the Prime Minister of Canada, Joe Clark, decided, he said, we can't be continuing to subsidize the fossil fuel industry. People should pay the price for what a gallon of gasoline is really worth. Well, 6 months later, he is no longer Prime Minister because of that. People do not see. Here's the thing: everybody wants change, but nobody wants to change.
Sure. Sure. Now, when you have, I'm just going to ask you this about fish. If you go to a restaurant and they're serving fish, will you eat the fish?
Will what?
Like if you go to a restaurant that's serving fish, are you the kind
Yes.
of person, because of what you do, that it's like, no, I'm going to have this instead? Or do you go ahead and
Well,
eat the fish? I'm just curious.
No, I don't eat fish. I don't eat meat on
Okay.
that. But also look at the carbon footprint. For instance, Chilean sea bass, a good example. The toothfish
Right.
that's caught in the Southern Ocean.
Right.
You catch this fish in the Southern Ocean. You transport it by weeks in a ship. You freeze it, put it on a plane, fly it to Paris, fly it to London, and there's no way that can be called sustainable. Now, is there sustainable fishing? Yeah. If you have a canoe, if you're coming out of off the coast of Africa or out of the Philippines and you're putting a line in the water, I guess you can call that sustainable fishing. But giant factory ships, purse seiners, longliners, drift netters, this is no way this can be sustainable. This is just basically strip mining life in the ocean. I mean, it's getting so bad right now. I saw a story last week where they're actually harvesting jellyfish We've gotten down to finding industrial uses for jellyfish. And one of the worst things is that they're going after krill or zooplankton down in the Southern Ocean. Norway and Japan are doing this. And why are they going after the krill? Because they want to make it into a protein paste fed to factory farmed animals. So a cheap form of protein for factory farms. So they're literally taking the food out of the mouths of whales and penguins and fishes in order to do that.
Well, I was just going to ask you what you thought of that too, like the tilapia farms or the salmon farms.
Well, the salmon farm, I can't speak to tilapia farms, but I can speak to salmon farms. Salmon farms are extremely destructive. To raise one salmon on a salmon farm requires taking 70 fish out of the ocean, out of the wild, to feed that one fish as you raise it. Plus, they're concentration camps really where the disease is kept under control through massive doses of antibiotics and through a lot of very deadly chemicals. For instance, they have to have a bath to destroy the salmon lice, and they put this fish into the chemical, which means that fish cannot be eaten for at least a year because of the chemicals in it. So it has to take that long to get over it. The salmon lice then go from the salmon farms, and then they go and affect wild salmon, which is also causing a diminishment of wild salmon populations. We removed 24 salmon farms in British Columbia, and within a very short time, the wild salmon populations began to recover because of that. So we got to get rid of these salmon farms if we're going to have a healthy fish population. And when you think about it, if you or I were to take a piranha and put it in a lake in California, that's a crime. We're putting an exotic predator into that. But here we're taking the Atlantic salmon, an exotic predator, putting it into the waters of British Columbia, Tasmania, Chile, and other places where it doesn't belong. And it's competing with the wild thing. So how are they able to get away with that when we can't put a piranha in a lake in California?
That's true. That's true. Absolutely. What do you say to people, right? Like today, if you were trying to tell people about this plight today, what would you say?
Well, I said that everybody's got to be involved. We have to be concerned. We have to look at our carbon footprint. We have to look at what we eat and the impact of that. We have to look at, things that we don't even think about. For instance, what's a major source of plastic pollution in the ocean that we don't think about? Automobiles. Every time an automobile goes down the road, it loses microplastics. And a study in Norway showed that 30% of the microplastics in the coast of Norway was automobile tires pieces. And see what happens when plastic gets into the ocean, it breaks down into microplastic, and that microplastic is then ingested by fish and seabirds and everything. And if a human being eats fish today, I can pretty much guarantee that there's microplastic in their bodies. It gets in there. It's even infiltrated into the krill. And who knows what that is going to cause in the long run. In addition, the higher the fish is on the food chain, the more heavy metals, methyl mercury, and everything is involved in it. And if you eat swordfish every week, you're going to have a high methyl mercury content in your body. Same with sharks or other larger predators like that.
I was just thinking about that because I used to do catfishing. I catch them, I would eat them. If I didn't eat them, I put them back, just to keep things going. But I know they came up in California. California is full of these environmental laws. It's California. But I remember reading somewhere that you could probably get away with eating 1 or 2 catfish a week because otherwise the mercury levels in the river were so high that it can affect you.
Yeah, well, you could, if you take a hair analyst, analyze the hairs of any person, you can tell what the mercury content is in your body. And people who eat fish a lot have very high levels of methyl mercury in their bodies.
It's interesting. It's just that pretty much comes from human waste, right? From factories and stuff, right? Getting in the water. Yeah.
Here's another little fact that people don't think about. Just to study in Canada, crematoriums pump 17 tons of methyl mercury into the atmosphere every year, coming out of the bodies of the people they burn, and that's just in Canada. So all these things we just don't give any thought about. We don't think about it, but it's the constant interchange of these chemicals.
That makes absolute sense too. I never thought about that. Wow, I learned something new today. See, that's what this is about: learning from you. What can be done, what can't be done. So when you look at the operations that you have, I know you don't want to give stuff away, but what are your next steps?
We have a campaign against super trawlers coming up in November. We're working on a campaign to protect river dolphins in the Amazon. We have people right now on the island of Mayotte and in the ocean that are confronting turtle poachers and protecting turtles. We will be returning to Iceland next June to protect the whales, and we're also involved heavily in the Faroe Islands to stop the killing of pilot whales and dolphins there. But, really the strength of the conservation movement lies in the hundreds of thousands of people around the world who are getting involved passionately on every level. That's really what makes the difference.
Like I said earlier, I think what you guys do is wonderful. And I think
thank
more
you.
people should be involved doing this, and more people should be aware of what is going on. Because at some point, if this doesn't get under control, like you say, the ocean's going to cease to be there. We're going to cease to be there.
Yeah, I just encourage people to go to our website and support our Navy. Join our Navy. That's really what it is. We want to build up a Navy that protects the ocean.
So do you guys work with Greenpeace at all?
No, Greenpeace has a completely different approach, and it's more of a mainstream approach, more educational, I suppose. But again, there's a lot of diversity within this movement, different approaches, and that. The Greenpeace that I co-founded is no longer the same Greenpeace. It's changed, just as Sea Shepherd has changed. I've never changed, really. That's the difference.
So in all the years you've been doing this, up to this point, what are you most proud of?
Driving the Japanese whaling fleet out of the Southern Ocean, taking away the market for seal pellets, which they have a quota of 400,000, but they kill 27,000 only because it's heavily subsidized by the Canadian government. But that literally has saved hundreds and hundreds of thousands of seals. We've shut down drift net fishing, long lining in many places. So there's a lot of victories over the years, and so I'm proud of all of those various victories.
That's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. What's your website?
www.paulwatsonfoundation.org.
Okay, and if people want to donate, can they donate through your website?
Yes, and actually I try to encourage people to become monthly donors. That gives us the security to do our operations. That could be only $5 a month or whatever. But when you have a monthly donor program, then you've got that much money to work with, and you can get the ships out there and do things.
Fantastic. Paul, this hour blew by. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I really appreciate it. This is something that is near and dear to my heart. One last question. If you're on the strip in Vegas, and it's you, if you're on the strip in Vegas, and it's you, and it's Greenpeace, it's Sea Shepherds, and other conservation groups, what do you say to draw people to your group?
We don't say anything, actually. We do things, and people see what we do. You'll never see one of us out on the streets asking, sign this petition or donate to us. We're not going to be on the streets. We'll be in the news, and we'll be in documentaries and things like that. But we're going to concentrate on the actions at sea. And so that's really probably the difference between us and a lot of groups.
Okay, cool. Well, again, thank you so much.
I have been on the strip in Vegas, and I recruited a very wonderful supporter. Steve Wynn is one of our supporters. So,
awesome! That would be really awesome. Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate it. Enjoy your time in France.
Thank you.
There's nothing like Paris, I'll tell you. But maybe at some point down the line, we'll get you on again and get some updates on how things are going with you guys.
Oh, well, thank you.
All right, sir. Have a great one.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much. All right. This is near and dear to my heart. I'm glad I got to talk to this gentleman. I was so excited to have him on. All right. I will see you guys tomorrow. Show 6:30 p.m. Pacific. And I'm real happy. So if you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hate the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. For equal opportunity here. And that's all I can say. So I will see you guys tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Have a great evening, folks.